Hello and welcome to this session, BDS against Israel. Why? Campaign against Israel, why, how, and what can be done. My name, together with Plina Shavit Baruch, we are running the campaign that deals with, or the team that deals with BDS. Our entire session will be dealing with this subject. But first and foremost, we have a question that is for you, the audience, which will appear here on the screen, or it does appear here on the screen right now, and we will be very happy if you can send your response as a digit rather than the entire text. So please, you can text us your answer, just the digit please, not the entire text. I'm sorry, I do not see the screen, so I cannot interpret the question, but she seems to be asking it. Oh, it's in English, okay.
The legitimization of Israel. Again, please send a text answer.
She is now repeating the question in Hebrew. The question that is up on the screen in English is now repeated in Hebrew. Please text your response, just the digit, not the entire text on the board.
Okay.
The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was achieved through the ruthless and well-planned ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians. And this colonial logic of conquest, destruction, and expulsion has continued to the present day. Today, about a third of the Palestinian people live under a brutal military occupation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. Israel has stolen land, built Jewish-only settlements, expelled Palestinians, and cornered others into ghettos surrounded by walls, military watchtowers, and checkpoints. 12% of the Palestinian people live inside Israel as third-class citizens. They are subjected to a system of racial discrimination and racist laws that amounts to apartheid, as defined by the United Nations. Half of the Palestinian people continue to live outside Palestine as refugees, denied their right to return to their homes. In 2014, Israel carried out one of its bloodiest ever massacres of Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip. More than 2,000 people were killed, a quarter of them children. Israel is only able to maintain its regime of oppression because of the support of international governments and corporations. When those in power refuse to act to stop this injustice, we need a global citizens' response to stand alongside Palestinians in their struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. In 2005, Palestinian civil society came together to issue its call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The appeal calls for concerted nonviolent action to isolate Israel, as was done to apartheid South Africa. We are calling for boycott pressure on Israel until it complies with international law in the following ways: end its occupation and colonization of land seized in 1967, recognize the right of the Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, respect the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes. The BDS movement has empowered people across the world to take effective action against Israel. Trade unions, student groups, churches, academics, cultural figures, and social movements are joining together to make an impact. Already, because of BDS, Israeli export companies are complaining that it is getting harder to export their products, and grassroots action has prevented Israeli ships from docking at ports around the world. Major Israeli exporter SodaStream, targeted by our campaign, has announced plans to close a factory it operates in an illegal Israeli settlement. G4S and Veolia, two huge corporations that help Israel maintain its occupation, have lost billions of dollars worth of contracts as a result of BDS activism. Both companies are now talking about ending their role in Israel's crimes. Some European governments are now taking action against aspects of Israel's occupation, and several US academic associations have endorsed a comprehensive academic boycott of Israeli universities. And many prominent musicians and artists support the cultural boycott of Israel, refusing to perform there. Israeli business leaders and politicians are warning that the boycott is starting to isolate Israel. In fact, the government is so worried about the strategic threat that BDS poses to their regime of oppression that it's using its enormous resources to undermine the movement. There's a real fear within Israel that it is fast becoming the pariah state that South Africa once was. But Israel's recent massacre of Palestinians in Gaza is a painful reminder that there's still so much more we need to do. With your support, we can develop even more hard-hitting BDS campaigns and get the word about Palestinian rights out to a wider audience. So please, consider making a donation to the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the largest Palestinian coalition that leads the global movement. It will be a real contribution to the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality.
Zachraim Tovim.
Good afternoon.
I am not Tzipi Livni.
אני לא ציפי לבני.
I know many of you were confused.
אני יודע שרבים מכם התבלבלו.
She'll be joining us
היא
momentarily.
תצטרף אלינו בעוד מספר דקות.
In a sense,
במידה מסוימת,
Tzipi Livni is a
ציפי לבני
combination of influences.
היא שילוב של השפעות מז'בוטינסקי,
I am Weitzman.
ויצמן. מי חשב שמישהו יוכל לשלב בין ז'בוטינסקי וויצמן באדם אחד?
Person whose parents were
אדם אישה שהוריה היו בארגון בעצמה הפכה לשם המזוהה בישראל ובמקומות רבים בעולם.
think of it.
ותחשבו לעצמכם, כאשר אתם מדברים על ציפי לבני, אתם פשוט אומרים ציפי.
And everyone knows.
וכולם יודעים במה מדובר.
And that's true in my country.
זה נכון גם במדינה שלי, בארצות הברית,
Much of the world.
ובמקומות רבים אחרים בעולם.
That hasn't always been true. Think of
זה
it.
לא היה נכון תמיד. תחשבו על מנהיגים פוליטיים בישראל. אף אחד לא קרא לדוד בן-גוריון דובי,
I remember ever addressing Prime
אני גם לא זוכר שקראנו לבגין מיקי.
What we all refer to.
אבל כולנו קוראים לציפי לבני פשוט ציפי.
And why?
ומדוע?
It's easier to say what
קל יותר לומר באיזה משרד היא לא השרה, מאשר לומר באיזה משרד היא כן השרה.
absorption,
גם קליטה, גם משפטים,
negotiations with
גם המשא ומתן עם הפלסטינים, גם המשנה לראש הממשלה, סגנית ראש הממשלה, וכעת היא
in this campaign,
עוסקת בקמפיין הזה
leading the coalition.
ותוביל את הקואליציה בתקווה בממשלה הבאה. אז כאשר אנחנו מדברים על ציפי לבני, אנחנו לא רק מסתכלים אל העבר, אנחנו גם אומרים לעצמנו מהו העתיד. ומדובר בעתיד שהוא זוהר כמו עברה המזהיר ובהחלט יאיר מרבית מהחששות שלנו ויהווה להארה ולאור לכולם בארץ. אז בבקשה קבלו את ציפי לבני. Thank you very much and hello everyone. I must begin by saying something unfortunate that happened today. On the way here I heard that the minister Uri Orbach has passed away. Yes. He was not a regular face in Israeli politics. It's a bit difficult to even call him a politician. He was very sharp and poignant. He had a marvelous sense of humor, a brilliant sense of humor that will completely disagree with anything I have to say over this stage today. But he would have managed our disagreement in such an honest way, and we will all miss him dearly. And from here to move on to the subject at hand, which is the BDS campaign against Israel. With each day that passes, we are hearing more and more. We wake up in the morning and we find another piece of information, another piece of news that keeps underscoring the alienation of Israel. There are attacks against institutions, Jewish institutions, yesterday in Denmark, and also calls to ban students and scholars, and the publishing of all sorts of letters saying that people don't want to hold cultural ties with the State of Israel. And this is just from the last few days. This is not a list of things that happened over the last 12 months or anything. And what is happening is that the Israeli public is really going within themselves, and they feel despaired, and they have reason to feel despaired, because we have enemies, and we have this campaign, and we have those that are undermining the existence of the State of Israel. And I, as an Israeli, will not accept one thing. There is a process here that is somewhat of a brainwashing within the State of Israel, whereby everything that happens in the world and the situation Israel is in is all comprised of anti-Semitism and delegitimization and all sorts of other big words, and that there is a political advantage saying that this is the situation Israel is in because it's completely unchangeable. Nobody can expect a leader to change something that is impossible to change. Anti-Semitism we've had for so many years, thousands of years. So now how can we expect a prime minister to change something like that? It's inconceivable. And so the public no longer waits for a change. They have despaired, they have given up, they think there is no way of changing it. And a sentence that we're used to saying, we are a small state encircled, encompassed by rivals and enemies, that's become the only thing we're proud of. Now, we can and must fight anti-Semitism, even if it is in the world. I'm not saying that there is no anti-Semitism and there's no delegitimization. There is. But we must, and there's one condition, to manage to discern and distinguish between two different things. We must know what is criticism over the policy of the Israeli state, whatever the policy is, and distinguish between delegitimization and anti-Semitism. When delegitimization challenges the right of the State of Israel to exist and the right of the Jewish people to have their own state, and many times, when it's difficult to distinguish between the two, then we can always just find symptoms for them, whether it's double standard, whether it's only singling out Israel, or if it demonizes Israel as a state. But there is also, alongside these, criticism of a certain policy of Israel. And some people don't like this distinction. They don't like to distinguish between legitimate criticism and the delegitimization process of Israel. And unfortunately, our Prime Minister, Netanyahu, is unwilling to make this distinction because it serves him politically, internally. And I'm saying difficult things, but we have to say these things. They must be placed on the table. I mean, don't have to go far to understand that the way the Prime Minister perceives himself is that the state is him. What is he saying? They want to topple me, as if there is a king or a monarchy in some faraway African country, as if there's a military coup happening. We are just a month before elections, and it's even desirable that the Prime Minister is changed as long as it's done in a democratic process. The second thing is that we don't have to look outwards, look inwards. What are we seeing in these videos that are being published? If Israel is me and my policy is the State of Israel, then we cannot criticize my policy, because whoever criticizes my policy, says Netanyahu, is in fact anti-Israeli, post-Zionist, and is cooperating with the enemy. And believe me, as far as I'm concerned, it is not important to make the distinction whether those criticizing him are perceived by him as cooperating with ISIS or because they think we are cooperating with the Nazis. It makes no difference. It's fine-tuning of the same message that says whoever criticizes me is cooperating with the enemy. And I refuse to accept that, not here in Israel, but worse than that. This view prevents us from fighting the way we should against delegitimization as a country, because this combination against us is criticism of the policy in Israel and the BDS movement and the anti-Semitism and the Islamists who are using the situation in order to build another layer on top of it. And that is the layer that goes against Israel as a state. And in these movements, all of us, we need to all fight against them. But those who are yelling out to the world about what's happening in here, those who are trying to criticize the policy and are immediately saying that you are all anti-Semitists. When Netanyahu says Europe is entirely anti-Semite, so we have to stop exporting there, he is not contributing to those very few friends we do have, those who want to protect the existence of Israel, its security, its right to exist, and the right of the Jewish people to have their own state. We don't give them the right tools to help us. In this joint campaign, we are in fact alienating them one step further away from us. And that also has implications on Israel's national security interests. We all want to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear state and having nuclear weapons. But for years, Israel did not head this campaign. And when we are now insisting on management, because we want the United States to be on board against Iran, what we see is that in light of these declarations, instead of the coalition against Iran consolidating and uniting in order to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear state, now we're discussing the question of whether the Prime Minister should be coming to the US or not. And those democratic legislators who wanted to support sanctions are taking a step back. And believe me, it's the United States. It's those places where there really is huge support across the board, also in public opinion, of the State of Israel. But when we look there, then that's it. They might break, and there may be implications there that will influence our ability to harness the United States in this campaign of singling out Israel in the UN against phenomena that we are seeing in Durban and against policies of those BDS organizations that are taking action against us. And it's not just that. Another entity that is using it, another person, is Abu Mazen, who has recognized Israel's weakness around the world and this mix-up and this confusion. And therefore, instead of negotiating with Israel and instead of giving Israel what we need, ending the dispute, ending the conflict, based on the understanding that we need two nation states. Israel, which is the home of the Jewish people, but also a state for all citizens, and the right of the Palestinians for their own country. Security for Israel, distinguishing between the blocks and those that are outside the blocks. Preventing the right of return into Israel. All of that is now mixed up with Abu Mazen, and this mix-up is being exploited by him to gain support in issues that are no longer just 1967, but are really going back even further. Now look, ladies and gentlemen, I am willing to fight the world for those things that really are meaningful and important to Israel. I have done so before, both as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have always done that, even in those places that were most difficult. It was always behind closed doors and not outside, because I didn't want our enemies to see this breakup, this disconnection, and this tear that has now happened between us and the United States. It's no good for us. It's not good for security. But with all due respect, I am not willing to protect and to defend a policy that is not right for Israel. And I definitely am not willing to defend those things that are important to Netanyahu, which is mostly his chair, his office, and the survival of a prime minister does not mean that we should have such a tear, such a gap between us and the rest of the world. And so I will say something that is very harsh, but if whoever is really concerned about delegitimization and understands the importance of the relationship with the United States, cannot allow the next coalition that is now being outlined in Israel. The dream team, the dream coalition of Bibi Bennett and the ultra-Orthodox are the dream team, the dream coalition of those organizations who are against Israel, because they will make use of that in order to say this is what Israel is all about. That will be the basis for that delegitimate thing, that non-legitimate thing that they are doing against Israel at all times. And since I do not only believe in threats, and I don't only want to say what we shouldn't do, I want to say what we should do. And Herzog and I, and we have said that before, have created a partnership, a new partnership, and we have called ourselves, we came from the two parts of the Zionist movement. It was said before, my parents were Etzel members. My father was part of the Chirut and the Likud. Herzog's parents were from the Haganah, from the Labour Party, but we understood that we must defend Zionism, not only against those who are attacking Zionism as delegitimate and racist, but against those who are taking Zionism and putting into it content and essence that are against our values, and also make it easier for those outside who think that Zionism is racism. Because if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people, but all its citizens have equal rights. But when Netanyahu reads the Declaration of Independence and says it's only the homeland of the Jewish people, and he refused to write the word equality, that is exploited by those who are saying unjustly that Zionism is racism. And therefore the first thing that we did, even in the name we called ourselves, is to fight for Zionism, for that Zionism, and by putting into it the content that we believe is true. And don't misunderstand, there's nothing about our ideology and worldview and joint policy of Herzog and myself that's trying to satisfy the rest of the world. We are doing what we can do in order to do things right by Israel, with our values and our parents' values on both sides of the political map, and this is all done for our children. But this all is allowing us to go back to basics and to make Israel legitimate once more. The second thing is that the same way as we will bring back this perception, this view of what Zionism is, we make other distinctions as well. After we have made a distinction between delegitimization and legitimate criticism, we have to distinguish between the right policies so that we together can cope, together with those friends we have around the world, against delegitimization. First of all, we have to distinguish between settlements and security. Security is Israel's right. It is its duty. Every leadership is indebted to citizens and must provide it to the citizens. And most of the world still acknowledges Israel's right to defend itself. And we will insist that a distinction, a deep distinction, be made between IDF soldiers who are campaigning against terror, because IDF really is the most moral army in the world, and those terrorists who are aiming for our kindergartens and classrooms. But it is not enough. Once we say that security is a need and it is your duty to provide us with it, because we are fighting against the same enemies, against radical Islam and against terrorism that is also harming you, whether it's in Denmark, in Paris or in New York. But the settlements is part of a vision that we used to live. We once thought that there will be one country between the Jordan River and the sea, and we will be able to give everyone Israeli citizenship, but it's no longer true. I don't want to give those millions who are now living in Judea and Samaria citizenship. And therefore we must part ways. And the second thing that we have to make a distinction in is between the blocks, the settlement blocks, and it doesn't matter what each one thinks, whether they should have been built or not, it's irrelevant. They are there, most of the Israeli citizens live there, and once we make a distinction between these blocks as part of what will be the state of Israel, no matter what, under any plan, and between those isolated settlements, and we will not allow any day that the Prime Minister says something like two states and then a minister in his government says no way, it will not happen, and if it's worse, and even worse, the housing minister runs up a hill and says I will not let it happen. Once we make that distinction, we will make the blocks legitimate once again, and we can also make those settlers who are Israeli citizens and equal citizens and should be receiving from the government of Israel education and any other service that an Israeli citizen should receive, and an ideological movement that is trying to lure us into a place that does not serve Israel's interests. And we will insist that we will not be brought back to 1948. The State of Israel was established not only because of the Holocaust, but due to the Holocaust, for the right that the Jewish people has for a country, and not just for any country, a country in the state, in Israel, within the land of Israeli borders. And it's based on the distinction from 1947 that there should be two states, one Arab and one Jewish. And all those who are yelling at the world, it's not 1967, it's 1948, they are bringing everyone back there. And I feel embarrassed to say this, to tell you what I've heard from some of the leaders around the world, what is happening on their streets, where people start asking, maybe Israel should not have been established if it's bringing so much damage to the world. And it's not, and you don't even mistake to think that there is a difference between people on the street and politicians, because it's happening all over the world, in most of the world, because the streets do have an implication and do influence the leadership. We can get the world on board, and I can tell you why, because I'm not just arrogant. I do get blamed for being arrogant, I must admit, and as if I'm just talking about election slogans. President Bush's letter, if you want me to finish, I will end in just a moment. President Bush's letter saying that the solution of the refugees, the Palestinian refugees, should be solved in a Palestinian state, was because I got the approval from Sharon as Prime Minister to go to Shirak and to talk about two nation states. That's what it means. Israel is the Jewish people's land. We are the solution for the Jewish people. I am the Minister of Absorption. I am absorbing these people. But if you are the Palestinians, you should be setting up your own country and solving your refugees' problems. And that is the only way to get the world on board. And the same happened when Europe wanted to disconnect research relationships, research ties, and to send researchers back with Horizon 2020, because they are suspecting that we are talking with the language of a start-up nation, but are still talking about the greater Israel view. And I'm telling you that 2 telephone calls and 1 text message, and it was all put to right again, because we must do things together, with unity within the State of Israel, against the legitimization, against anti-Semitism. We must and can harness those friends we have around the world for those very basic things, the basic layers of Zionism and the existence of the State of Israel. But in order to do this well, we must also change policy. Thank you very much.